There had been no explosions or breaking alert inside Burkina Faso. However, something shifted a few hours after the Mali strikes. Security personnel in Ouagadougou moved swiftly, took up positions at strategic locations, stepped up patrols, and sent the people a clear message: keep an eye out and report anything out of the ordinary. This was not a standard precaution. The mastermind is based in Ivory Coast, since the nation's rapid response to events outside its borders typically indicates one thing. The story starts when what happened close by is regarded seriously enough to affect what happens at home. Not because of what has actually transpired within Burkina Faso, but rather because of what the authorities think might occur in the future and how they are attempting to keep one step ahead of events. What then might occur? Let's investigate. You must start with the actual events in Mali in order to comprehend why Burkina Faso responded so swiftly. There, the attacks weren't handled like regular occurrences. Several armed actors, including Tuareg rebel elements and insurgent groups, were reportedly operating at the same time. That suggests a more complex security environment than a single group operating independently. But it does not necessarily imply that they were collaborating under a single leadership. And that's where the problem starts. Patterns are simpler to spot when one group launches an attack. Authorities are able to observe behavior, predict movement, and react appropriately. However, that clarity vanishes when multiple actors are involved simultaneously. It becomes more difficult to forecast what might occur next or whether similar situation will reoccur in the future. This type of uncertainty is not limited to a single nation. There are borders in place like the Sahel, but they don't completely separate events. Stability in one location can affect stability in another, particularly when armed organizations operate over long distances. For this reason, bordering nations keep a careful eye on developments in Mali. The threat to Burkina Faso was not only the immediate effect of the attacks, but also the potential for the situation to change or worsen. Even if there was currently no concrete proof to show how or where, and waiting becomes dangerous when the kind of uncertainty arises, because it may be difficult to respond properly if a situation changes quickly. Therefore, rather than waiting for information, Burkina Faso decided to take immediate action based on what the situation in Mali suggested might happen next, rather than actual threats within its borders. The choice is crucial. It demonstrates that the reaction was not motivated by fear or conjecture, even though Western countries are still reluctant to acknowledge his leadership. There are numerous other nations that are significant enough to need attention, yet are not fully defined or comprehended. After coming to that conclusion, the next course of action becomes evident. You don't wait for the circumstances to arise. Before it happens, you get ready for it. It leads straight to the following sections of the narrative. What precisely did Burkina Faso implement, and what does that tell us about its perception of risk? The response had a well-defined framework. Once the decision to take actions was taken, security personnel were stationed in strategic locations, particularly in Ouagadougou. However, its presence wasn't dispersed. Units were placed near key intersections or places where traffic naturally flows. That decision is important. Authorities concentrated on areas where activity could be effectively observed rather than attempting to cover everything. You see, more than simply who is there when you manage or keep an eye on this location, you begin to comprehend how traffic moves through the metropolis. Another layer was engaged concurrently. The duty of obtaining operational intelligence on crime and insurgency fell to security units. This causes the emphasis to change from responding to events to spotting trends early on. It entails focusing on what appears out of the ordinary rather than merely what has already gone wrong. The public instruction followed. People were requested to report unusual activity, especially in the vicinity of the government buildings, airports, and military camps. In these places, even a minor disturbance could have fatal repercussions. Authorities indicated where attention should be directed by emphasizing them. The scale of observation is also altered when citizens are involved. The system grows rather than depending just on official patrols. Is there anything to catch? The likelihood of catching it early increases when more individuals pay attention to minor details. When combined, the strategy is simple: become more visible when it counts. Pay closer attention to movement. Continue to gather data. Promote early reporting. There is only a discernible change in awareness, not a complete cessation of daily activities or severe limitations. It is crucial to maintain that balance. It demonstrates that the issue is being treated as a possible concern rather than an actual threat. The objective is to remain prepared without going overboard, not to interfere with everything. For this reason, observation is still prioritized over rigorous control, because the most beneficial thing a nation can do in an uncertain situation is to have more clarity before making decisions. This raises the following query. Instead of stopping everything at the borders, why is internal places receiving so much attention? The number of forces used is not the most telling aspect of the response. It's the focus of attention. Authorities did not target border regions with their warnings. Rather, they directed individuals to certain places within Burkina Faso. That decision was made on purpose. In this situation, a minor incident can have a significant effect. Disrupting them doesn't need a lot of force. You require planning, timing, and access, and that alters the way security is managed. Entry points would be a major focus of the response. If the primary worry was fighters entering the nation, there would be more inspections, controls, and border constraints. But this isn't really noteworthy. Internal awareness is noteworthy, observing conduct rather than just motion, since the earliest cues are frequently provided by behavior, something a little strange, a recurring presence that is not quite appropriate, a pattern that is only apparent to those who are paying attention. These are minor details. However, little details are important when the risk is unknown. Civilians were asked to report anything unusual for the same reason, not because authorities are powerless, but rather because increased participation raises awareness. If anything is forming at all, it is more likely to be noticed early with a larger network of monitoring. It is a sensible strategy. You don't think there is a threat inside already. However, you also don't rule out the idea. Therefore, the focus shifts to prepared attention rather than treating the circumstances as a definite danger. Remain vigilant. Take note of the modifications. If something becomes clearer, reply. This maintains the response equilibrium. Not too passive, but yet not too restrictive. Additionally, it illustrates how managing uncertain circumstances involves boosting visibility without completely shutting things off. Because the calm concern of regional stability is frequently the most effective response. When a problem is not clearly defined, learn more, make a decision later. Furthermore, this strategy extends beyond a single nation. Others in the area also reacted, but in ways that are consistent with their own interests and priorities. Burkina Faso isn't the only nation making adjustments. Other governments made their own adjustments at almost the same time. They differed in form, but were related in chronology. Authorities in Niger cancelled national parades scheduled for May 1st. That might appear unconnected at first glance. However, public festivities unite sizable crowds. Large gatherings also become vulnerable in unpredictable security situations. That exposure is decreased by cancelling them. In a subtle but significant adjustment, the Ivory Coast, meanwhile, approached the same issue from a different perspective. Following the events in Mali, officials were said they anticipate a potential refugee inflow. That shows a different kind of worry, the relocation of individuals due to instability rather than an immediate attack. You now have 3 reactions, all of which were brought out by the same development. Niger is restricting big public events. Ivory Coast is getting ready for population immigration, and Burkina Faso is raising awareness within the country. Local priorities influence each other, but timing is what ties them together. Weeks later, none of these choices were made. They responded to the same moment that happened swiftly, and that tells you something crucial. The Mali events were not considered isolated incidents. They were viewed as potentially having broader implications, even if those effects vary depending on the nation. Regional awareness functions in this way. There isn't just one answer. However, attention is shared. Every nation perceives the situation according to its particular concerns, geography, and risks, and this precisely is what you see. Don't panic. No consistent response, just a series of changes that all point in the same direction. A situation where uncertainty is growing and the circumstances shift once that moment is attained, not because of verified results, but rather because of potential outcomes, which puts everything to a close. What does it indicate when nations start making adjustments before things are completely developed? This is not about a single incident. It concerns how nations react to unpredictability in their surroundings. Burkina Faso did not hold off until there was a verified threat within its borders. Rather, it changed its position according to what has been happening in the vicinity. That choice is part of a larger strategy that puts preparation and awareness ahead of delayed responses. This type of response falls somewhere in the middle. Since action has been taken, it is not passive. Because there is no significant disruption to normal life, it is not extreme. It is deliberate balance. If the situation changes swiftly, a nation may be unprepared if action is taken too late. However, taking excessive actions in the absence of solid proof might lead to unneeded stress and instability. Thus, the strategy becomes quantifiable, raises awareness, gathers more data, and remains prepared to react. However, the lack of extreme steps is equally significant to the activities that were done. There is no proof that a direct threat has actually infiltrated the nation, no announcement of an emergency crisis, and no complete closure. This indicates that the matter is being handled with caution, not disregarded, but also not exaggerated. This demonstrates a useful comprehension of how uncertainty functions. Decisions are made using signals: what is known, what is feasible, and what cannot yet be verified. When results are uncertain, this is what you are witnessing. It was a response to a shifting environment in the area rather than something that was already happening within Burkina Faso. This is why it is important, because it demonstrates how governments function when they lack comprehensive information but are unable to wait for it. The last question is the result of their early adjustments, careful observations, and quiet preparations. Are nations preventing future issues, or merely reacting to uncertainty that may never fully manifest when they start taking action based on potential outcomes rather than past events? The quick fix is already in place. In Burkina Faso, security has been strengthened, awareness has grown, and focus has been intensified. In important areas, however, the true question is not what has been done, but rather what will happen next. The next stage is not always apparent in circumstances such as these. There might not be an abrupt increase or an instantaneous follow-up. Rather, a time of observation normally ensures. Authorities keep a tight eye out of indication that either validate or refute their initial suspicions. Movement, patterns, public reporting, and local information start to influence the subsequent choice. The situation stabilizes if nothing out of the ordinary happens. The moment goes by without any more effects, and security measures may eventually restore to normal levels. However, the reaction might swiftly change if fresh information begins to surface, something that doesn't match something that suggests activity. Because of this, the present strategy is adaptable and does not force authorities to follow a set course. However, the events beyond the nation will still be significant. If Mali's status continues to be unstable or changes. It will continue to affect how neighboring nations react. Decisions made there have a lasting impact on how the area thinks and responds. As a result, the situation becomes dynamic rather than static. Every day provides fresh information, even if it is subtle, and each piece of information contributes to the assessment of whether the present level of caution is sufficient or has to be adjusted. For the time being, the response is still under control. There is no escalation beyond what is required, no attention withdrawal, just ongoing preparedness. And that's what makes this moment unique. It's not a definite catastrophe, but rather a time when decisions are being taken in real time and outcomes are still developing. This raises one last question. Was this early response successful, or was it a response to a scenario that never completely developed? Was this the proper course of action? Tell us in the comment section below, and please do not forget to like and share and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Thanks for watching.